Have you ever experienced the unsettling moment when someone you deeply care about suddenly goes silent? No warning, no explanation, just an empty void where words used to be. At first, you might brush it off, maybe they're just busy. But as hours turn into days, and days into weeks, the silence begins to weigh on you. Your mind starts crafting stories. Did I do something wrong? Did they stop caring? Was our connection never real? Silence has a strange way of speaking louder than words. It echoes in our minds, forcing us to confront our own insecurities, fears, and attachments. It's not just the absence of conversation, it's the presence of uncertainty. And uncertainty can be terrifying. But what if silence is not a rejection? What if it's not a punishment? What if, instead of being something to fear, it is actually something to understand? In Zen and Buddhist teachings, silence is more than an empty space, it is a mirror. A mirror that reflects the nature of our thoughts, our attachments, and the stories we tell ourselves. Today, I'll share with you a powerful story. A story of two friends, one who was left in silence, and the other who walked away. Through their journey, we will uncover the hidden truths behind what people actually think when you stop talking to them. More importantly, we'll discover how to make peace with silence, rather than allowing it to control us. Because sometimes, the loudest conversations happen in silence. Let's begin. The tale of two friends and the unspoken goodbye. Haru and Kaito had been inseparable for years. Their friendship was effortless, conversations flowed naturally, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and mutual understanding. They discussed everything, from their deepest fears to their wildest ambitions. It was the kind of bond that felt unbreakable. Then, one day, without warning, Kaito disappeared. No messages, no replies, no explanation. At first, Haru thought little of it. Maybe he's busy, maybe he needs time. But as days passed with no response, unease settled in. By the second week, doubt crept in. By the third, worry turned into frustration. He reread their last conversation, searching for a misstep, a wrong word, a moment where things might have shifted. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, the silence remained. Then, the questions started. Did I do something wrong? Did he stop caring? Was our friendship ever real? Haru tried to rationalize it. Maybe Kaito was dealing with something personal. Maybe he just needed space. But the lack of closure gnawed at him. The longer the silence stretched, the louder his mind became. Anger rose within him. If he didn't want to talk, why not just say so? Why disappear like this? Hurt turned into resentment. Maybe I was never that important to him after all. But beneath the frustration was something deeper. Pain. A pain that came not from Kaito's silence itself, but from the meaning Haru attached to it. Desperate for answers, he decided to seek wisdom from an old Zen master who lived in a nearby temple. As he entered the peaceful courtyard, the scent of incense filled the air. The master, an elderly man with a gentle presence, was tending to a small bonsai tree when Haru approached. "Master," Haru said, his voice heavy with emotion, "someone I deeply care about has stopped talking to me. I don't know why. It hurts me deeply. What should I do?" The master looked up from his tree, his eyes calm and knowing. He studied Haru for a moment before placing his pruning shears down. Then, with a slight smile, he simply asked, "Why does his silence trouble you?" The question caught Haru off guard. "Because, I don't understand it," he said, "because it feels like I've been abandoned." The master nodded. "But tell me, Haru, are you suffering because he has stopped speaking? Or because you expected him to continue?" Haru hesitated. If you had never expected his words to last forever, would his silence have the same power over you? Haru opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The master gently picked up a fallen leaf from the ground and held it between his fingers. Friendships, like seasons, change. Some endure, others fade, but the wind does not ask the leaf why it has fallen. It simply continues to blow. Haru sat in silence, letting the words sink in. For the first time since Kaito had stopped speaking, he realized he was not suffering because of the silence itself. He was suffering because he was resisting it. Lesson 1. Silence reveals our attachments. Haru sat in deep thought, his heart still heavy. The master's words echoed in his mind. You are not suffering because he is gone. You are suffering because you expected him to stay. Expectation. That was the real source of his pain. Haru had believed that his friendship with Kaito was unshakable, that their conversations would always continue as they had before. He had attached himself to a vision of their bond, assuming that it would remain unchanged. But life does not work that way. In Buddhism, attachment is often compared to holding onto a rope too tightly. The tighter we grip, the deeper the burn when the rope is pulled away. Haru had been clinging, not just to Kaito, but to the idea of permanence in their friendship. But if I don't hold on to the people I love, won't I lose them? Haru finally asked. The master shook his head. Holding on to something does not make it stay. It only makes its departure more painful. Haru thought of a bird perched on a tree branch. It is free to stay or fly away at any moment. The tree does not grasp at the bird, nor does it demand an explanation when it leaves. It simply accepts. Silence, too, is something we cannot control. It is neither an attack nor a betrayal, it is merely an event. But the meaning we attach to it is what causes suffering. Haru had believed that Kaito's silence meant rejection. But what if it was simply a shift? A change in the natural course of life? Am I hurt because Kaito is silent? He whispered to himself. Or because I cannot accept that things have changed? Lesson 2. The ego and the need for closure. Haru's thoughts raced as he walked along the familiar path home. A part of him wanted to reach out to Kaito, to demand an explanation, to reclaim the certainty that their friendship still existed. But another part of him resisted. If I message him first, does that mean I've lost? Does it mean I care more than he does? The inner conflict was exhausting. It was not just about the silence. It was about what the silence meant in Haru's mind. This was the ego at work. The ego seeks control, clarity, and validation. It wants closure, not because closure is always necessary, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. When someone stops talking to us, we instinctively assume it is about us. Did I offend them? Do they no longer value me? But sometimes, their silence has nothing to do with this at all. People leave conversations for reasons we may never understand. Personal struggles, inner conflicts, the need for solitude. But the ego resists this truth because it does not like not knowing. The need for closure is often a disguised attempt to maintain control. But the truth is, we do not own people's presence. They are free to come and go, just as we are. Haru took a deep breath. He had spent so much energy wondering why Kaito had gone silent, but had never asked himself, why does his silence bother me so much? Was it really Kaito's absence that hurt? Or was it the feeling of being powerless? The loss of certainty? The fear of being forgotten? Maybe Kaito's silence was not rejection. Maybe it was simply redirection, an invitation for Haru to turn inward and confront his own need for validation. Lesson 3. The stories we tell ourselves. As the days stretched into weeks, Haru's thoughts became heavier. The silence, once confusing, had now transformed into something else, resentment. If Kaito truly cared, he wouldn't have just disappeared like this. A real friend wouldn't leave me without a word. His mind kept replaying past conversations, looking for clues. Was there something he had said? A moment he had overlooked? And yet, the truth was simple. He did not know. But that was not enough for the mind. The human brain detests uncertainty. And when it lacks answers, it fills in the blanks with assumptions, stories that may or may not be true. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not come from reality itself, but from the interpretations we impose upon reality. Kaito's silence was just silence, but Haru had turned it into a personal betrayal. We assume silence means rejection. We assume distance means we were never valued. We assume absence means we are no longer important. But what if none of that was true? What if Kaito's silence had nothing to do with Haru at all? People withdraw for many reasons. Sometimes they are overwhelmed. Sometimes they are struggling with their own demons. Sometimes they simply need solitude. Not every absence is a rejection. Not every silence is meant to harm. Haru realized that his pain did not come from Kaito's actions. It came from the story he had created in his own mind, a story filled with assumptions, fears, and unspoken expectations. And just like that, Haru understood, if suffering is created by the mind, then peace must be found there too. Lesson 4. The other side of silence, what the other person feels. What Haru failed to see was the weight Kaito had been carrying. Behind his silence was a storm he had kept hidden, the loss of his job, the growing doubts about his future, the overwhelming feeling that he had nothing left to offer. Kaito had not abandoned Haru out of malice. He had withdrawn because he himself was lost. But how do you explain the things you don't even understand about yourself? For Kaito, silence was not rejection, it was retreat. A space where he could sit with his thoughts, process his emotions, and figure out his own path. He did not want to burden Haru with his struggles. And so, he chose silence. But Haru, unaware of this, had taken the silence personally. This is what the ego does, it centers everything around itself. They stopped talking to me, what did I do wrong? They don't reach out, do they not care anymore? They are distant, was I never important to them? The truth is, not everything is about us. People carry battles we cannot see. Their silences are often not punishments, but shields, defensive walls built to protect themselves, not to harm others. Haru exhaled deeply as this realization dawned upon him. What if Kaito wasn't leaving me, but rather trying to find himself? And just like that, his pain began to dissolve. Not because he had received an answer, but because he finally understood, not all departures are about us. Lesson 5. Finding peace in letting go. Haru sat by the river, watching as the water effortlessly moved past the rocks in its path. It did not resist. It did not hold onto anything. It simply flowed, and in that moment, he understood. His suffering had not come from Kaito's silence, but from his refusal to let things be. He had spent weeks clinging to the past, demanding answers, believing that closure could only come from knowing why. But what if closure wasn't something given? What if it was something we had to create for ourselves? Buddhism teaches that resistance creates suffering. The more we hold onto expectations, the more we struggle when reality does not meet them. Haru had been grasping at something that no longer existed in the same form, hoping that by understanding it, he could regain control. But peace does not come from control, it comes from acceptance. Letting go did not mean forgetting Kaito or pretending their friendship had never mattered. It meant releasing the need to define it, to demand that it must be something specific. If he returns one day, I will welcome him. If not, I will still be grateful for what we shared. The river did not stop flowing because a stone stood in its way. It simply moved around it, continuing its journey. And so, Haru too, chose to move forward, not by pushing the past away, but by allowing it to exist without resistance. Because true peace does not come from having all the answers. It comes from being at peace with the unknown. The true nature of silence. So, what do people actually think when you stop talking to them? Some will wonder if they did something wrong. Some will assume you no longer care. Some will overanalyze, searching for hidden meanings. And some will simply move on, accepting silence as it is. But at its core, silence is not about you, it is about them. Silence is a mirror. It does not reveal who you are, it reveals who they are. It brings to the surface their insecurities, their attachments, their need for validation. It forces them to confront their own thoughts without the distraction of words. For some, silence will feel like abandonment. For others, it will feel like peace. And that is the great truth of silence. It is neutral. It is neither kind nor cruel, neither friend nor enemy. It simply exists, and we are the ones who give it meaning. Silence reveals attachments. When someone stops talking to us, what truly hurts is not their absence, but our attachment to their presence. We crave continuity, fearing change because it threatens our illusion of stability. But real connection is not built on constant interaction, it is built on understanding. If a bond is genuine, it does not need endless reassurance. It does not dissolve in the absence of words. And if a relationship cannot survive silence, then perhaps it was never as strong as we thought. Silence challenges the ego. The ego wants answers. It seeks clarity, even when clarity is unnecessary. Why did they stop talking to me? What did I do wrong? Should I reach out first? But does knowing the answer change anything? Some silences are meant to be respected. Not everything requires explanation. Not everything needs closure. Silence forces reflection. When words disappear, all that remains is the self. If silence makes us uncomfortable, it is not because of the silence itself, it is because of what it reveals. It forces us to sit with our thoughts, to see the stories we create in our own minds, to recognize where we are still attached, where we still seek validation. But if we learn to embrace silence, it becomes a teacher instead of a tormentor. Silence is the ultimate test of connection. Have you ever sat with someone in complete silence, yet felt completely understood? That is the mark of a true bond, one that does not require words to exist. The greatest friendships, the deepest loves, the strongest connections are not measured by how often we speak, but by the unspoken trust that even in silence, we remain connected. Because in the end, silence is not a void. It is a space where truth reveals itself. How to embrace silence without suffering. Silence is often misunderstood. We fear it, resist it, and assign meaning to it that may not exist. But instead of fearing silence, we can learn to embrace it. 1. Detach from the need for explanations. Not all silences have hidden meanings. Not every absence is a rejection. Sometimes, silence simply is. The mind craves certainty, but life does not always provide answers. Let things be as they are, without demanding explanations. 2. Shift your perspective. When someone stops talking to you, it is easy to see it as abandonment. But what if, instead, it was a redirection? Perhaps their journey has taken a different path. Perhaps silence is what they need to grow. When we let go of personalizing everything, we find peace. 3. Find peace within yourself. If silence makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself, why? What insecurity is it exposing? What need for control is being challenged? True peace is not found in others, it is found within. 4. Trust the natural flow of relationships. Some connections last a lifetime. Others fade with time. Neither is right nor wrong. It is simply the nature of existence. When we accept that all things are temporary, we stop clinging to what was and start appreciating what is. 5. Be open to reconnection, but do not demand it. If someone returns, Welcome them without resentment. If they do not, send them peace in your heart. Holding on to bitterness does not heal wounds, it deepens them. Silence is not an absence. It is a presence of its own, a space where truth reveals itself, where the mind quiets, where clarity emerges. So the next time someone stops talking to you, instead of filling the void with fear, sit with it, listen, and you may just hear the wisdom of silence speaking louder than words ever could. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever struggled with the pain of silence? How did you navigate those moments? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd be honored to read your reflections. And if you found value in today's lesson, don't forget to hit subscribe and join our community. Every week, we explore more Zen and Buddhist wisdom to help you find peace in life's uncertainties and embrace the quiet moments with clarity. Until next time, may you find stillness in the chaos, and peace in the silence.